Hi, it's Teresa from Dodge Nature Center, and time for another Nature to Go. And we're celebrating spring. Yeah, that's right. With it being the beginning of March, that means meteorologically, it's spring. Now, astronomically, spring doesn't start until March 20th. But I think we're all ready for it to be spring. Lots of things are going to start happening that tell us it's spring. And what are some of those things? We start noticing which plants are emerging and then which ones are flowering. We start to look at which birds are showing up, or if there are insects around or other kinds of animals that are suddenly much more active than what we've seen all winter long. We want to know when it's going to start warming up, and so we keep track of when does it get to be the first 50-degree day or 70-degree day? When can we get out there and wear shorts? And then we start paying attention to things like thunderstorms instead of snowstorms. Now, it's nothing new to be paying attention to spring, and for many indigenous peoples, their lives and livelihood depended on them being aware of the changes that were happening around them seasonally. So, for instance, here in Minnesota, the Ojibwe and Dakota peoples were very aware in the spring that it was time to do maple syruping. More formal records were kept as well. So in Japan, starting about 1200 years ago, records were kept for when the different cherry trees would bloom. China also was keeping records, cherry blossoms, peach tree blooming. In the 1700s, you've got Carolus Linnaeus. Now, he's the taxonomy guy, the guy who gave us the system for using genus and species. And he was very much into record keeping and being observant about lots of things around him. So in Sweden, he set up a system where he had a whole network of observers paying attention to when different plants were blooming so that they could compare across the country what time a certain plant was likely to bloom. In the mid-1800s, Henry David Thoreau kept records when he was at Walden Pond. He went out daily on hikes and kept track of different sorts of nature events that were happening. And then recently, in the last 100 years, you had Aldo Leopold in Wisconsin who kept track of many different natural sightings throughout his area, and this was part of what helped him develop his land ethic philosophy. Why this information has become useful is because it allows us to compare what we see now to what was happening in the past, and that lets us know if things are changing or not. Being aware of what's happening in the spring and all the other seasons, keeping track of that data, lets us know what kind of changes are happening. It might be something like a plant, like cherry blossoms, but also keeping track of records like when ice starts forming on a lake and then when does it disappear, or when different kinds of birds are expected, and are we seeing that happening sooner in the season or is it happening later in the season? Why this is important is because this helps in terms of farming and agriculture. Should we be planting sooner? Can we harvest later? When do we need to take care of plantings? If you're a state or a city that has some kind of festival or activity that is actually tied to a natural event, you want to know if when that's happening is changing. So if you're going to go down to Nebraska to look at sandhill cranes, or if you're going to the national capital to look at cherry trees there, you want to know when the best time is to do that. And so keeping records helps us to know if that is changing or not. Keeping the records also is for our health. Are there insects, are there creatures out there that are going to start being active sooner than we would expect? Are there plants that are blooming and therefore going to create issues for us sooner rather than later? All of these things, whether you're watching in the spring or other seasons of the year, is called phenology. And there's lots of different definitions for phenology. The idea basically is you are watching and recording information about when things happen in the natural world. You're tracking nature through the seasons, as the center definition says there. And there's a number of organizations that want to keep track of your observations. They're asking you to notice things like when the different plants are flowering or the leaves are coming out. They want to know when different insects appear, like monarch butterflies, or when birds are reappearing. So these are all organizations that you can find online, and they explain their process for collecting data, and you're able to contribute and pay attention to what's happening in the spring. So whether you want to do one of the formal programs or just get out and observe for your own enjoyment, spring is a wonderful time to get out into nature, start exploring, notice all the amazing things that are happening around you. Welcome back, spring. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Nature to Go, and we'll talk to you again next time.